Right. So, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about writing, which may not have come about in the way that you imagine it does. I mean, today we all use writing and use communication in a particular way. We know it exists. We write things. We make. It's not a big deal for us to be able to store information and transmit it through time and space. So you write something down, you set it aside, you can come back to it. It reminds you of what you had thought about or talked about or decided upon earlier. And also, you can write something down and you can send it to a friend. You can write a letter, you can send an email. You can store data and information on files on your computer. You can store them in a filing cabinet on a piece of paper. All of these things had to be invented. And frankly, the difference between filing something in a computer and filing something in a filing cabinet is essentially the same. One is electronic and one is hard copy, but they do the same thing. They have the same function. But where did all of this come from and why did it take place? Well, it's all part of the process of the urbanization and the formation of state-level identities that we've been talking in terms of Gordon Childs' urban revolution. Now, it actually has its origins somewhat earlier and may actually have something to do with the brain architecture of people remembering things. Now, how much can you remember? How much can you store in your brain? There's a limit. There's a limit to what you can store and accurately recall for a later date. And not only that, but what you recall may not be what someone else recalls, right? So imagine you're a Neolithic farmer. Let's say that you're an early agriculturalist, not yet to state-level identity or state-level economic or political system yet. You're just farming a field, and you have you've got to go to the next village to visit a friend. So you tell your son, you say, you know what, I want you to look after my sheep while I'm away. There's 3 sheep. I've got 3 sheep I want you to take care of, and I'm giving and trusting them to you. But your son is kind of mischievous and says, okay, you can count on me, and you go away for the day, you come back and there's only 2 sheep. You're like, I gave you 3 sheep. He's like, that's not what I remember. I don't remember that. You only gave me 2 sheep. I don't know what happened to the 3rd one. You must have done something else with it. Not my responsibility. So next time you think, all right, my clever but lazy son is going to try this again with me. So next time I go away, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, all right, I've got these 3 stones. 1, 2, 3. We all agree that these represent how many sheep I'm giving you, right? Okay. So you walk away and you put them into a little pouch, you carry them with you to the next village, you come back, and you put the pouch on your table when you come home, and your son, who has now lost a sheep, opens up the bag, pulls one of your pebbles out, sneaks it away, and there's only 2 in your pouch. He's committed fraud, theft. So you only have 2 of these pebbles in your pouch, and you come and you talk to your son, you say, I gave you 3 sheep, and I can prove it, because I open up the pouch and I look inside, there's only 2 pebbles. You're like, you've done something, I know you have. So next time, you think, all right, my son is clever. He's going to try and get around any of these things that I do. So what I'll do is I will seal over the bag with clay, and I'll actually take some sort of a symbol that only I have with me, that he'd have to steal off of my belt pouch or something like that, off of a necklace that I wear around me. And it's a seal like you get with stamping a seal even today. Metal, in fact, is stamped. Coins are just stamped metal. It's the same concept. 7,000 or 8,000 years ago, people decided that they were going to start sealing things to guarantee that the contents of things like that, just simple recording devices, numbers, right? It has nothing to do with words or anything like that. You're person to person, face to face, agreeing what these three pebbles mean, right? These are sheep. Next week it could be jars of oil, or it could be something else, right? It's numeracy, counting for numbers, that is hard to remember and hard to agree upon, that you need to transmit with verifiable accuracy from either one place to another place or from one time to another time, where the origin of writing comes from. Now, imagine you start to, you're not just a simple farmer with a son anymore, trying to control a transaction of exchanging 3 sheep. Let's say you're an expanding city that has thousands of sheep and thousands of jars of oil and thousands of other commodities that need to be tracked and accounted for as part of tax levies and that sort of a thing. Well, it's not good enough to just have one item, one 3-dimensional item. And in fact, what in Mesopotamia they started doing were clay tokens that they would, some were simple and just shapes like a sphere or a disc, and some they incised designs and patterns onto. And it didn't take them very long to figure out, if we're incising patterns onto these 3-dimensional tokens, like an X or a drawing of a jar of oil, why don't we just take a tablet and just incise in 2 dimensions what we have been doing in 3 dimensions? And so these tokens, as they're called, probably just pebbles to begin with, later on clay objects that had specific meanings. This particular design pattern meant a jar of oil, this meant a sheep. Eventually, a system of different commodities and numbers for them. In the case of cuneiform, wedge-shaped writing from Mesopotamia, they used the end of their stylus that they used to inscribe with. The back of it was round, and they would do a half circle for ones and a full circle for tens. And you could count. So you would have these little numbers next to their drawings of what commodity you were talking about, and that would be 10 or 20 or 13 jars of oil. And these would be inscribed onto these tablets, and then they would be stored. That would record that this particular person donated this particular quantity to the temple, and the temple then transported this commodity back to this village, and you could then control your economic situation through this numeracy, but also a reference to those individual items. Now, what hasn't been said so far is, where does language come into this? We've only been talking about numbers and things. One of the beauties about this is that I could say this is, let's say, 3 dogs. But if I was in France, I would say 3 chiens. Or if I was in an Arab-speaking country, you would call these kalb. So the language is not specific to these tokens, right? You can use any language for them, as long as you agree upon what it represents. If it's a dog, it's a dog, but you can call it chien or kalb or dog or whatever, or hund or anything. Language is irrespective of that. But as state-level societies started to come together, for one thing, languages also started to be unified. Not just politics or religion, but the language was selected so everybody could communicate face-to-face. And also, once you had enough of these individual commodities that were represented in Mesopotamian, in Sumerian and Akkadian scripts, about 400, 450 characters, all of the sounds that your language could create have already been represented. So there's a limited number of syllables that any language uses. Once you have enough of these characters that you've created for numbers and commodities, then it occurred to somebody, wait a minute, I could actually represent spoken speech through this as well. And this came later. So when you think about writing, you usually think about, it's a way to represent talking. It's a way to represent and record speech and that sort of thing. But actually it arose out of economics. It arose out of bureaucracy. And only later was applied to speech and talking and writing down more complex thoughts. To give you an example of this, there's what's called the rebus principle. And this is essentially, you can draw a picture of a bee, right? A buzzing bee. Bzz, bzz. Probably some around here right now. And you can draw a picture of a leaf, right? So, I just threw that one away. You can draw a picture of a leaf, right? A bee and a leaf. Now, those two things are tangible, handheld, physical things in the world. And you can draw pictures of them, right? You can draw a picture of a bee and you can draw a picture of a leaf. But what's harder to represent is the word belief, right? But if you can combine those two images, someone reading it will actually be able to sound out the word belief. Now, this is what seems to have happened in a lot of early scripts, early writing, is that it was first used for accounting, it was first used for communicating numbers and transactions of commodities, but then once all of the syllables that your language uses were represented, you could then recombine those for another purpose, which then became literature and mythology and used for a vast number of other purposes, history writing, and everything that we use it for today. Now, I've been talking a lot about Mesopotamian scripts, but this is the same for Egyptian writing. We have some early signs used on labels from the Abydos cemetery, and that expanded then into using it for literature as well. The Incan Quipu system seems to be a series of knots. Now, this never really became a two-dimensional script, but it almost certainly was some form of accounting device, but could have actually also been used to communicate language. So it's a three-dimensional rope and knot system that could have represented actually quite complex ideas. Also in China and elsewhere, we find the expansion of symbols that were used originally for probably some commodity control, and that was necessary for expanding cultures. That when you're getting to such a large size of a community, you can't remember the hundreds of thousands of things going on. You have to have a way to make sure that you record it. So alongside the communication, there's also fraud control devices. So these seals that we see are a way to guarantee that whoever made this transaction approved of it, and later on when you go check it, you can say, that is my seal that signed this at the bottom. We do this today with our signatures and actually lots of cultures still use stamps. We do for official documents quite frequently. We use stamp seals to say, yes, this is approved by this office or this person. So you can see that when communities and cultures become more complex, when complex urban society starts to grow, there's a real need for a different way of doing communications. This one-on-one fleeting agreement that you've got, that we saw with our son and his father, that's not good enough for a more complex, larger scale society. And so we see the emergence of writing starting to evolve, and other types of guarantees like seals and sealings emerging in a lot of these different cultures as hand in hand with their expansion of complexity. All right, that's a little supplementary thing on early writing. Hope you enjoyed it. All the best.